What did they do?
Outrage is brewing this morning over this viral video showing two black men escorted out of a Philadelphia Starbucks in handcuffs by police.
Well, what did they do? What did they do? Someone told me they did.
They didn't do anything. I saw the entire thing.
My name is Ben Shifley. I've seen a lot in my life. I've seen people change. I've seen war. But one thing that intrigues me the most is how history repeats itself time and time again. Let me tell you a story. One of bravery, redemption. It's sort of a coming-of-age story, if you will. But it's deeper than that. It dives into themes such as racism, and growing up, and proving others wrong, perhaps, if you were to go that far. It reminds me of my time when I was a wee lad, and people didn't treat each other equally. A time when people would look down on one another for the color of their skin, or how old they were. But this story beats that. This story is more than that. So let's get into it. Let's get started, shall we? Here looks like a good place where we can begin. I guess I should start with introducing our characters that we'll be working with here. On the far left, you'll see Jim, a sturdy African-American male who goes as sort of Huck's sidekick throughout the book. They both work off of each other. They go through their tough times. Well, now that we're bringing up Huck, he's dead center, as you can see. Gray shirt. There he is, in his pride and glory. He's glorious. My phone went off. That's alright. You know, old men can text too. On the right we see Tom. Tom has his own book, but he plays sort of a side character throughout the story. He comes in the beginning, but fades off as the story goes on. He comes in during the finale, which we'll talk about later. So now that you have come to realize the characters, let's get started. Let's talk about the story for a bit, shall we? It begins with Huck Finn, a young boy who is out looking for adventure. He has $6,000 to his name from the very start, which he received from a treasure in the end of Adventures of Tom Sawyer. We learn early on that money has very little value to Huck, as he gives it to Judge Thatcher, in fear that his father will get his hands on it. Huck's father eventually gets hold of him and takes him to his shack in the woods. Eventually, Huck escapes his grasp and runs away in a canoe found by the river. Huck finds himself on an island and runs into a slave. But not just any slave, mind you. Miss Watson's slave Jim. When we meet Jim is in a bit of trouble. Jim has run away from Miss Watson in fear that he would be sold to another slave owner. People take notice of this, that both Huck and Jim are missing. Most people put two and two together, claiming that Jim has murdered Huck and ran away. Clearly, this is not the case, as Huck is perfectly fine and is tagging along with Jim. Huck and Jim set off down the Mississippi to begin their journey. They go on many adventures on their way down the Mississippi, whether it's getting caught between a long-time family feud with the Grangerfords and the Shepherdsons, or even picking up some new faces on the journey, the Duke and the King. Two conmen set on making money any way they can. Eventually, these two ruin things for Huck and Jim, after they sell Jim off for a quick buck. Huck wouldn't have any of that, as he planned to break Jim out. This is around the time Tom comes back into the fold, as he creates a dramatic plan to help Jim escape. It all goes south, as they eventually come to a standoff, and Tom gets shot. Huck wakes up to find that Miss Watson has made Jim a free man, and that Tom is okay. This is when our story comes to an end. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn touches base with many themes throughout the story. Racism, growing up, and the maturity and loss of innocence. These are just a few of the themes that are seen throughout the novel. Let's start with racism. Racism plays a heavy role throughout the book with slavery. The book takes place in a time when African Americans were enslaved to farms and labor work. We see slavery come up multiple times, whether it's Huck running into slavers, or the fact that Jim is a runaway slave. Jim represents the entirety of racism in the story. We see the struggles that Jim has to go through, whether it's people heckling him, being sold, or the fear of always being on the run. Connecting this to modern day is easy. As seen through the clip earlier on TV, two black men were arrested at Starbucks for just being there. We see, to this day, African Americans are facing prejudice and discrimination. This isn't the social norm nowadays, but during the time this book takes place, it was. Huck shows growth throughout the book and matures as the story goes on. He learns from every situation he gets himself into, and by the end of the book, he is following his own moral compass. He goes against society in multiple ways, through helping Jim from beginning to end, ensuring he becomes a free man. This follows the theme of growing up and maturity. The theme is apparent throughout the novel, and goes alongside the theme of loss of innocence. Huck loses his innocence, as he gets to see the ugly side of society throughout his journey, and works towards being better than them. As my narrative comes to a close, I had hoped to tell you a little bit about Mark Twain and his writing style. Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, was born November 30th, 1835. He wrote two big hits in American literature, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Mark Twain took a different approach to writing Huckleberry Finn than most would at the time. He used his literature to make comments on society and use irony to make fun at the problems going on. He took his time writing Huckleberry Finn, and often put it to the side. He never rushed the novel, and in the end it paid off for him. He eventually published the book in 1884, after working on and off on it for multiple years.